as we're waiting for the PowerPoints, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like to start by thanking the team at HRRC, not least Michelle, Faith, Aviva, Ati, and Ismail for their assistance and hard work in putting this event as well as the entire project together. I would also like to thank our expert advisors as well as the research team for all their hard work and dedication. It has been a privilege to work with all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2012, the heads of state of ASEAN signed the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, uniformly affirming and committing to respecting, promoting, and protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms in the region. In the preamble to the AHRD, ASEAN governments stated their commitment to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Charter of the United Nations, the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, and other international human rights instruments to which ASEAN states are parties. Among the many commitments made in the AHRD is a firm pledge guaranteeing the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Article 22 of the AHRD guarantees this right to every person. It further obligates ASEAN member states to eliminate all forms of intolerance, discrimination, and incitement of hatred based on religion and beliefs. Now, the formulation under Article 22 bears resemblance to the first sentence of Article 18 of the ICCPR, which states that everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Article 18 further states that this right shall include the freedom to have or adopt a religion or belief of one's choice and freedom to manifest one's religion and belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. Sub-Article 2 further states that no one shall be subject to coercion which will impair one's freedom to have or adopt a religion or belief of his choice. Now, we are aware of the fact that not all ASEAN member states are parties to the ICCPR, but the majority of the states are. At the moment, 6 out of 10 ASEAN member states are parties, namely Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. Furthermore, the jurisprudence based on Article 18 is widely accepted under international law and therefore provides substantive legal norms that is extremely relevant to this study. Now, besides the ICCPR, I should point out that ASEAN member states also have binding obligations under related international conventions to which they are party, such as the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which contains specific guarantees for the freedom of thought, conscience, and religion for children. Notably, all ASEAN member states are parties to the CRC. Now, besides these regional and international commitments, religious freedom is also guaranteed in the domestic laws of ASEAN member states. This takes the form of clear legal guarantees in constitutions. In Brunei, of course, the constitution really states that religions other than Islam can be practiced in peace and harmony, but this could be interpreted to also provide for some form of religious freedom. Now, a significant number, like Malaysia and others, also include non-discrimination guarantees on the basis of religion and guarantees the right for religious groups to manage their own religious affairs. I should point out that Annex 1 of the synthesis report contains an overview of these constitutional provisions. Now, having set out this legal framework for analyzing religious freedom in the region, the value of the country reports that you will find in the USB stick provided to you is to highlight areas where further improvements can be made. For the purposes of this study and for this report, specific attention is given to religious persecution and conflict, as these constitute and comprise areas which require the most attention and improvements. Now, the country reports show that varying degrees of religious persecution has been documented across ASEAN. Religious persecution is here defined as sufficiently serious violations of one's human right to exercise one's religion, beliefs, thoughts, and conscience. It should be noted that fact, persecution is also a crime against humanity and has been accepted as a basis for asylum. Now, religious persecution amounting to violence, in other words, violent religious persecution, involve threats to life or freedom. These include bodily attacks, attacks against property, arbitrary detention, involuntary disappearances, prosecutions of religious followers, including converts and dissidents for apostasy and blasphemy, as well as forced conversions. Now, we also take note of other forms of persecution that do not amount to violence, and these will include serious restrictions on one's human rights, such as the denial of voting rights, denial of access to education, coercion by a religious majority in public schools, and other coercive practices. Well, this study takes the view that all forms of religious persecution are repugnant. It places particular emphasis on violent religious persecution as it constitutes the most egregious forms of human rights violations and poses greatest threat to international and regional peace and security. Now, religious persecution may take place as a result of specific state policies against one or several religious groups. This thereby implicates the state. However, it bears emphasizing that even where persecutory acts are not carried out by state actors, but by non-state actors, the state may still incur responsibility if it neglects or refuses or fails to protect the persecuted group by reason of their religious membership or beliefs. Going on to religious conflict, which is the other aspect that we've given special attention in the study. And there is a close connection between violent religious persecution and conflict. In fact, it's been observed that they usually occur in tandem. For instance, religious persecution may lead to retaliation by groups that were initially victimized, thereby escalating into outright religious conflict. Now, it bears also emphasizing that conflicts that arise out of religious persecution affect more than just religious communities. They are conflicts that will affect entire societies. In fact, it is also likely that when religion is one source of conflict, there are also likely to be other sources of discontent and discord that contribute to that conflict. Based on country reports, significant trends in violent religious persecution have been documented in several ASEAN states, unfortunately. Again, violent religious persecution is defined as threats to life or freedom, including bodily attacks, attacks on property, arbitrary detention, involuntary disappearances, prosecutions, and forced conversions. Significant trends have unfortunately been notably documented in countries, in ASEAN countries such as Myanmar, Malaysia, and Indonesia. We will highlight some of these here. Now, the Myanmar country report notes a significant increase in reported instances of violent religious persecution of Muslim minorities since 2012. This, the country report notes, takes place after both the reforms were announced. In reporting this, we recognize the difficulties pertaining to the situation from the government's perspective, especially in having to address the rise of Buddhist nationalism under democratizing conditions. This we noted, and we will talk a little bit about it later, takes place especially with respect to the Mahbata movement as well as the 1969 movement. Now, the country report notes that the most extensively documented instances of religious persecution pertain to the treatment of Muslim Rohingyas, who are the numerical majority in northern Rakhine State, but are politically and socially marginalized, largely due to their highly contentious citizenship status. The country report does note that the use of the acronym is highly controversial and uses the term under advisement because it is partly because it is a better known term outside of Myanmar. It notes that the Rohingya Muslims have suffered serious human rights violations, which have included the denial of the right to citizenship, restrictions on freedom of movement, obstacles to family development, confiscations of land, forced labor, exclusions from the local economy. Now, the report is careful to note that there is disagreement as to whether the situation there constitutes religious persecution or sectarian conflict, since violence has sometimes been documented on both sides. It concedes that it is indeed difficult to identify the perpetrators of these violent acts. However, there is arguably state responsibility, as it notes, because the government has because the state's duty to protect has not been fulfilled. Now, with respect to Malaysia, the country report notes that there has been a notable increase in persecution of religious groups in Malaysia with respect to religious minorities as well as dissenters within the majority religion, which is Islam. One particular instance pertains to Muslims who wish to convert out of Islam and who face detention and prosecution under the laws. It also notes that apostasy, which is the conversion of Islam, is even a crime punishable by death in one of the states. Fortunately, the law has not yet come into force because its constitutionality is in doubt. And the report also notes that there has been an increase. The report also notes that there has been an increase in intra-religious persecution targeted at Islamic religious communities that are not aligned with Sunni Islam. Sunni Islam is embraced by the majority of Muslims in Malaysia. Groups that adhere to teachings generally perceived to deviate from Sunni Islam have been prosecuted as heretical. This includes the members of the Al-Aqam group, as well as a religious cult called Sky Kingdom. In addition, the report notes that Shia Muslims have faced increasing harassments and detentions. Besides minorities within Islam, the country report also notes that violent religious persecutions have taken place in the form of demolitions of places of worship. There have been at least 6 cases between 2005 and 2014 where local authorities demolished churches or chapels built by the indigenous community. There are also reports that Hindu temples have been completely or partially demolished since 2005, and this includes, unfortunately, from a cultural perspective, the prehistoric ruins of Balsamil Tomb Temple. Now, the government justifies these demolitions in grounds that the structures lack the proper permits or approval. That may well be so. Unfortunately, since many of these structures predate the Malaysian state, the claim that they were unlawfully built makes it somewhat more complex and is sometimes recognized. At the same time, there is a sense in which these demolitions fail to give due regard to the religious sensitivities of the followers. Going on to Indonesia, the third country with significant trends in religious persecution, the country report highlights that violent religious persecution have been mostly intra-religious, although Christian communities have also faced acts of violence. Now, the persecution of Ahmadiyya Muslims have attracted the most serious attention. It is, as emphasized and tied to an increasingly assertive demand for the group to be declared outside of Islam and thereby banned. The report notes a fatwa, a 1980 fatwa by the Indonesian Council of Ulama, which declares Ahmadis to be non-Muslims. The council have also demanded that the government completely ban the group. There were also reports of attacks on mosques and other properties belonging to the community, and unfortunately some fatal attacks on their followers. Now, these attacks have been committed by what can be characterized as hardline Muslim groups. However, the government has not fulfilled its duty to protect all the Ahmadis as well as to bring the perpetrators to justice. There's a sense in which that instead the rights of the Ahmadis have been further restricted. Besides the Ahmadis, the Shia community has also reportedly faced increasing persecution. The report notes, for instance, a 2011 incident where a small Shia community was attacked, in which one follower was killed and one houses burned down. The leader of the community was also charged under the defamation of religion laws. Now, the report was very careful to note that this is an isolated incident thus far, but that there is evidence of rising anti-Shia sentiment, including demonstrations demanding that the government ban the group. Now, based on country reports, we have also noted that there have been significant religious conflicts in several ASEAN states. In Myanmar, Malaysia, and Indonesia, these conflicts involve competing religious groups, although there is criticism that the government appears to be biased in favor of one group over the other. In the Philippines and Thailand, religious conflicts have arisen as a result of separatist movements. Now, with respect to Myanmar, the country report notes with concern inter-religious conflicts in 2012 and 2013, which have included riots in Rakhine, Mattila, Rakhine, Lashin, and Kambali. It notes that sporadic conflicts had occurred in the past between Buddhist majority and its Muslim and Christian minorities. However, the 2012 and 2013 conflicts were unprecedented in scale. The report connects this to political changes that are and have been occurring in Myanmar after 2011 and highlights violence against Rohingya Muslims as well as other Muslim minority groups. The role of Buddhist national ideology in inciting such violence is particularly noted in the report. With respect to Indonesia, the reported instances have been had to do with interreligious conflicts that took place largely during the transitional period to democracy, identified as between 1998 to 2004. And during this time, there were several large communal conflicts between Muslims and Christians, the worst of which took place in Ambon and Maluku, where some 10,000 fatalities were reported. These communal conflicts have fortunately abated after peace agreements were signed around 2003 and 2004. Since then, other conflicts have arisen, but on a much smaller scale, and these usually revolve around claims of defamation of religion and disputes over building of places of worship. The country report also notes that conflicts tend to be inflamed by the politicization of religion, especially when there are local elections going on. Now, with respect to Malaysia, religious conflicts noted in the country report involve mainly violence against religious symbols, sites, or institutions. The report notes that there have been an increase in interreligious conflicts in Malaysia between 2010 and 2014, and these were mostly sparked by a highly controversial High Court ruling that the Catholic Church had the right to use the term Allah in their Malay language version of its newsletter. Now, the decision has since been overruled on appeal. During this period, there were reports of attacks on places of worship belonging to Christians, Sikhs, and Muslims. However, Christian churches were disproportionately targeted at this time. Perpetrators burned down churches, threw fireworks and Molotov cocktails, slashed churches with paintball, bricks and stones at glass windows of some churches. A Sikh temple was also attacked with stones during this period. There were also reports of pig heads being thrown into the compounds of two mosques. Besides property damage, fortunately no casualties were reported in any of these cases. However, these acts of symbolic violence, as the report notes, is worrying because of its intimidatory effect, especially on religious minorities, and have raised concern about the religious freedom of minorities as well as their status as equal citizens. And with respect to Philippines and Thailand, we note that religious conflicts there have, particularly in the southern part of the Philippines, in the southern part of Thailand, Mindanao, and Patani, these conflicts have arisen from separatist movements where a regional group asserting a distinct ethno-Islamic identity claims self-determination against a predominantly Catholic Philippine state and predominantly Buddhist Thailand. The reports are careful to note that religion is only one factor in the range of political, economic, and social discontent upon which separatist claims are based. Nonetheless, it is a factor and has been invoked by separatists to assert a regional identity that differentiates them from the rest of the population and thereby provides a very strong basis for mobilization. At this point, and it has been noted, the conflict in the Philippines has abated under a fairly protracted peace process. A peace agreement was signed in 2012 to provide greater autonomy to the region, although the ultimate disposition of that agreement remains unresolved. In comparison, the peace process in Thailand has been less successful, with sporadic instances of violence, including bombings and killings, continuing in Jakarta and southern Thailand. Moving along, we also wanted to note that the country reports have reported certain significant improvements in the protection and promotion of the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion across ASEAN. It's not all bad. We have noted these improvements in 3 ASEAN member states, Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. However, we also wanted to emphasize that there are some worrying trends and further improvements could be made. Here we highlight some of them. Firstly, in non-PDR, the country report notes that there have been a decrease in reported incidents of persecution over the past decade. However, some reports remain, especially in certain rural areas of the country. These reports state that local village or district officials, as well with the assistance of the local police force, have reportedly coerced believers to renounce their Christian faith or to engage in animist worship against their will. There are also reports that Christian minorities who refuse to renounce their faith, despite orders from local authorities, have been forcibly evicted from their villages and in some cases dispossessed of their properties. Some have also reported being subjected to arbitrary detention and imprisonment for holding unauthorized religious services or conducting religious activities. Again, it should be noted that such reports have declined in recent years, and what remains appear to be occurring mainly at the instigation of local authorities at the village or district level. It should also be further noted that the country rapporteur was unable to document responses from the state with regard to these instances of persecution, and one of the reasons is because Algeria has yet to submit periodic reports to the Human Rights Committee addressing its obligations under the ICCPR. It's not the only reason, but that's one reason. With regards to Vietnam, again, the report notes improvements in the Vietnamese government's treatment of religious groups in recent years. However, some state persecution appears to remain. For instance, it notes that several religious leaders have been imprisoned, although the Vietnamese government's position is that they have been imprisoned on political rather than religious grounds. In addition, there are reports that the government continues to monitor as well as at times violently detain religious groups that operate outside official government sanctioned religious institutions, and these include unrecognized branches of the Calcutta Church, the Hoa Ha Buddhist Temple, independent Protestant and Catholic house churches in the Central Highlands and elsewhere, Kumukrom Buddhist groups, as well as the Unified Buddhist Church of Vietnam. Notably, Vietnam's treatment of its religious minorities have been highlighted by the Human Rights Committee in its concluding observations on Vietnam's periodic report to be in contravention of its ICCPR obligations. Now, thirdly, Cambodia. Although Buddhism is a state religion and has a very strong influence in the country report notes that there have been no notable instances of religious persecution in the country, and this contrasts with the situation under the Khmer Rouge regime, where a range of severe religious freedoms violations were reported. For instance, Buddhist pagodas were reportedly destroyed, Buddhist monks and nuns were defrocked, monks were threatened with death or killed if they did not comply or follow or put their faith in Angkor rather than religion. These occurred during the Khmer Rouge regime, and there were also testimonies stating that the regime prohibited Chams from practicing their religion and imprisoned or killed Cham religious leaders and elders. Now, the current lack of religious persecution in Cambodia is to be commended. One possibility is that the country is still in the midst of rebuilding itself, but it should be commended that, as the country report points out, the government appears to take a valid denying approach to its religion and does not actively restrict religious activities. Nonetheless, there are concerns that this situation could change. The report notes that there is an increasing number of Christian converts in the country, and this has caused some tension between Christians and Buddhists in Cambodia. The report also notes that there have been sporadic conflicts between Buddhist and Christian groups, and highlights, for instance, an incident in 2006 where a group of Buddhists destroyed an unfinished church in Kandal province, with villagers chanting along with Buddhism and down with Christianity. Now, this is an isolated incident so far, however, it could pose challenges for the Cambodian government in the future should the situation continue to worsen. The reports note, based on the reports, we have noted two countries where there's an absence of religious conflict or violent persecution, and these are Singapore and Vietnam. Now, as the country report emphasizes, there is a general lack of religious persecution in Singapore, in the sense that there is no overt or outright violent persecution of any religious group by the Singapore government. Neither have there been any recent significant events of religious conflict. The last religious conflict in Singapore occurred in 1964. Generally speaking, as the country report points out, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion is generally protected in Singapore, but it tends to be subordinated to the interests of the state, such as public order, national security, and others. Of course, there is also state discrimination, and at the same time, one would note that Jehovah's Witnesses have been denied exemption from compulsory military service on grounds of conscientious objection. Under the general law, those who refuse to perform military service in Singapore are charged and prosecuted. For Brunei, the country report notes that there has not been a paucity of reported cases of religious persecution as well as religious conflict. This could be somewhat attributed to strong state control, so as well as size of the state. The state control has led to a general lack of space, political and civic space for dissent, and the state has taken a position that religious conflict or conflict of any sort has no place in Brunei. Nonetheless, has been noted that there is a there has been systemic state violence, surveillance of non-Muslim religious institutions and communities. Going forward, however, we should note that there are serious concerns that with the full implementation of the Sharia Penal Code Order 2013, there would be an increase in what we would consider religious persecution because of its harsh laws on a range of conduct. And these are some of them which we have known. It includes the prescription of very harsh punishments, including death by stoning, as a penalty for blasphemy, apostasy, and other forms of sexual conduct, including extramarital sex, homosexual intercourse, and sexual intercourse against children of nature. Now, going on to the second part of my presentation, in the course of this study, we found that there are several factors that contribute and have caused an increase in religious persecution and conflicts. These factors often lead to restrictive regulations and policies, as well as government actions that contribute to persecution and conflict. And here we highlight some of the institutional, political, and social factors that governments should take note in order to address and improve religious freedom in their respective countries as well as within the region. This is going on to institutional factors. One key institutional factor, of course, is how the place of religion within the constitutional state. One key institutional factor arises from the perceived need to realize privileges of a majority religion, and it has been observed that positive and negative state identification with religion tends to correlate with low levels of religious freedom. Now, the presence of state religion is one important factor, though not necessarily a conclusive one, which contributes to such instances of persecution and conflict. This occurs when the state pursues laws and policies that prioritize one religion to the marginalization of others. At the same time, the close identification of the state with one religion tends to lead the state to overregulate the majority of religion, and this could lead to expand the space for religious practice for the majority. It also tends to restrict the freedom of those who do not conform to the orthodox views of the majority. Consequently, dissenters and detractors tend to be regarded as heretics and prosecuted as such. Another institutional factor that we have noted that has led to government restrictions of religious freedom and consequently religious persecution is excessive statism or communitarianism. Now, this tends to be the case in single or dominant party states. States adhering to such state ideology tend to exercise extensive control over all aspects of life, such that religion is seen to be subordinate to state goals, more specifically to the overarching norms of state unity. When the state seeks to control religion through laws and policies, this tends to lead to restrictions of religious freedom, and there's a tendency for religions to be viewed as a threat because of its capacity to mobilize believers to supposedly counter state ideology. This is perhaps why, and religions that are not seen as indigenous to a particular country are often viewed with suspicion and hostility. Certain states, such as has been noted in the country report, such as Vietnam, have a tendency to see claims of religious freedom as having a political undertone, and this is often reinforced by minor separatist movements that also invoke religion as a basis for mobilization. Now, another important factor that contributes to religious persecution takes the form of incorporation of religion into the government's